Well, let's talk about a few news stories. So this is pretty interesting. I didn't know this. Now, there's a big issue about dark matter. Dark matter is 80% of all the matter in the universe, deduced by the gravitational effect it has, but they don't know what it is, and they can't detect it. And now there's a new theory, new to me anyway, that the dark matter is actually more dense close to the sun. So they're going to take an atomic clock, or they're proposing this, I don't know if it's officially been approved yet, and move it into an orbit close to the sun, inside the orbit of Mercury, and run it there to see if the speed of the atomic clock is affected by dark matter particles. That had not been able to observe that effect on Earth, but they think there might be a much denser degree of dark matter in that region, and they might be able to observe the effect. So that's interesting. The dark matter is one of the, dark matter and dark energy are one of the big, big mysteries in astronomy and cosmology. There's a lot more energy and a lot more mass than what we can see, and nobody knows what it is. This is interesting. I've been listening to some history podcasts talking about Winston Churchill, and one of the things about Winston Churchill is he read all these thrilling British Empire stories from the 1880s and 1890s, and so did I, by the way, and they were shamelessly proud of bringing the British Empire to the world and colonizing people and lifting those savages up to a modern standard of living. And as you know, many people now have a very dim view of colonialism, and here's a calculation on Al Jazeera from people in the University of Sydney that have figured out that it probably killed 100 million Indians. Pretty shocking, showing that the British colonialism destroyed the native industrial base of India with the British East India Company and converted them into shipping just raw materials out, which paid much less, which impoverished them so much that it caused famines and lowered the life expectancy from like 27 down to 21, which is pretty incredible and does sound much more in line with modern concepts of the actual consequences of colonialism. What I haven't read any analysis of lately is an analysis of how many of the native in North America were killed by the expansion of the empires here, but I think it was a similar number, as a matter of fact. Anyway, this is pretty amazing. I mean, just over the weekend, there was a show. One of the United States government officials, not Blinken, but one of Blinken's aides, made a public statement that it's a possibility that we'll go to war with China, which is a pretty outrageous thing to say, in my opinion. I don't see any reason for a war with China, and I don't think we should be even talking about it openly. I think that's crazy. But anyway, China is in big trouble. Or to be more precise, Xi Jinping is in big trouble. His zero-COVID policy is a disaster. People are rebelling against it. And now he's actually trying to say COVID is not so severe anymore, so it's okay to relax the policy, which probably means they're going to have a huge pandemic over there because their people are not vaccinated and not well enough. So we'll see what happens. Now they're having a push for mandatory vaccination, but they refuse to use imported vaccines that are powerful. They're going to use their local vaccine, which is very weak. So I think they're in for a lot more trouble about COVID over there, and therefore, so are we all, as the variants from there spread around the world. Anyway, this I didn't know. Everybody has been fleeing manufacturing in China, which I think is probably a second-order effect of COVID. You haven't been able to get stuff from China for about 2 years now because they keep having lockdowns, and there's backup on the shipping and everything, so everybody has switched to alternative supplies. I think that's what's going on here. But anyway, they say manufacturing orders are down 40%, and that's really drastic. So I think China is in for a great economic problem, and I think the Chinese citizens are going to be very unhappy with their leaders as their economy gets very bad. So, now here on Mastodon, Kevin Beaumont, a very famous researcher, Gossy the dog, has an interesting thread analyzing something Sophos calls the worm circus. And what this is a way to, I'll put a link in the chat, this is a way to attack air-gapped networks, which is common for industrial equipment like nuclear, the Iranian isotope separators for atomic bombs, and many other devices, military and civilian. They run in an air-gapped fashion, and you bring in software on a USB stick, and so this software comes in on a USB stick and uses DIL side loading, where there's a DIL on the USB stick, which is loaded instead of a system DIL, which is exactly how Stuxnet worked years ago. And they found a whole bunch of these variants, all attacking people in Africa, in Asia rather. And it infects the machines. It steals all kinds of data off the machines. It puts it encrypted on the USB stick. And then when the USB stick is plugged into a machine with an internet connection, it runs a different program and takes the data and sends it off to the command and control server. So they're able to steal data from air-gapped systems this way. And it's been going on for years with many variants and many different versions of it, but they're all related so they can tell. So it's pretty interesting malware analysis. And I'd say you could say it's a derivative of Stuxnet might be one way to look at it. So the Supreme Court has taken a case to decide whether people are allowed to discriminate against same-sex couples. And here it's a website designer who wants to make bridal websites for people that are getting married, but wants to not make them for gay marriages because she has a religious objection to gay marriages. And they discuss it, and I think both parties make very strong cases here. The one party says, if you're in a restaurant, you're allowed to put up a sign saying we can refuse service to anybody. He says, I shouldn't be compelled to be compelled speech where I have to make this artistic creation for people I don't want to make it for. And that's an interesting issue. And of course, the other people say, this is what bigotry is everywhere. Everyone refuses to serve a certain group of people. And that's bigotry, and you ought to stop it. So I don't know which way it's going to come out. They both making pretty strong arguments. So Elon Musk, who is just indistinguishable from Donald Trump these days, he takes every little slight and blows it up into something and lies about everything right and left. So he said Apple paused ads. Apple quit advertising because they're discriminating against me. And then it turns out that Tim Cook from Apple took him on a tour of the place and buttered him up. He said, well, everything's fine. Apple likes me again. And apparently what it was because of a shooting. There was a shooting in an LGBTQ plus nightclub in Colorado, which there was in November. And apparently Apple has a custom whenever there is a highly controversial racially charged incident like that, or bigotry incident, they do not want to advertise on social networks for a while because they know there's going to be all sorts of very incendiary comments on those social networks, even before Musk came back, although Musk has certainly gone very far into turning Twitter back into 4chan, from what I read. I'm not using Twitter anymore, just like everybody else in the information security community, but everything I hear says it's all full of the same hate speech you'd find on 4chan. And you certainly don't want to advertise in that place. So they say they pause advertising temporarily to avoid having their ads appear next to those highly offensive tweets. So we'll see. Now they're advertising again on Twitter, for what it's worth, because Elon Musk has offered enormous discounts to try to bring advertisers back. But I don't think it's going to work because he's scared away the primary people who the advertising was targeting, which is like rich coastal liberals. All he's got is Nazis and far-right figures that have come back to flood them, and those people are not, most of them are bots and fake accounts, and the other ones are not really, I think, buying the products, which is another thing. Tesla is falling like crazy because Musk is very strongly alienating the people who buy Teslas, which is, again, rich, democratic, coastal elites, far more than the heartland far-right people who he's cozying up to. So he does seem to be making extremely questionable business decisions, not to mention the morality of them. Anyway, I was amazed about this. This open source software host, FOSSHOST, is shutting down. I didn't know that the important things are here like GNOME. Really important things have been on this thing, FOSSHOST. I don't know why they're not on GitHub like everything else, but they were on something called FOSSHOST, and FOSSHOST is just one of these open source things run by just one person, apparently getting no money, and that one person just got tired of it and quit, and they can't reach him. And he's the only person who has the passwords to maintain this, to pay the bills or anything. So even if they have the money, they can't keep the server up, and now it's going down. Everything's going to shut down. The CEO is doing. If it's all totally dependent on one person, and they don't even give anybody else the passwords, then if that person gets sick or just quits or takes a vacation, then you're just toast. And this is highly unprofessional. This is why, it's probably a lot better if somebody would buy these essential open source projects like Microsoft or Google or somebody that can actually keep them up for a while. But anyway, that's one's going down. So all these projects have to scramble and move. And undoubtedly, any projects that are not paying good attention will probably lose their stuff. All right. And This is a script. Everyone's talking about the new OpenAI chatbot, which is so good you can get it to write poems and stories and plots for TV, and you can tell it to give you programming code. Say, write an assembly language to do this. Then you can say, convert this assembly language program to C++, and it can do it. So this guy has now written a plugin for IDA Pro that will use the AI device to take your assembly code and turn it into readable C. So, although this looks, it's not, it's providing meaning to functions decompiled. So it's taking, if you pay for the expensive version of IDA Pro that does decompiling, it will then add a description of what the function does up here, which sounds also pretty useful, although I guess that's not useful for free, but it seems like you could easily do that with Ghidra too. You can have it write a graphical description, a text describing what the code does. So sounds pretty awesome. Huge leap forward in AI. The flu activity is the absolute worst in the nation right now, very high in California. So the flu is spreading like crazy. A thing to be aware of. You should all get a flu shot as well as a COVID booster. I did those things, and I seem to be getting through this okay. And yes, one of the articles saying, Xi, because of national pride, refuses to accept Western vaccines and is determined to use the native Chinese vaccines, which are far less effective. And I think this is going to be very bad, as he is forced to relax the COVID lockdown restrictions and COVID starts spreading. Anyway, and in case anybody didn't know this, all the recycling you do, most of that stuff is not actually recycled, and they find 60% of it just gets shipped abroad to be dumped on like Asian countries. So it's especially plastic recycling, but I think a lot of the other recycling too has always been fake. That stuff is largely not really recycled. It's just shipped to another country that will just dump it. And as some countries are beginning to refuse to take it, we're beginning to have to face that we actually should be recycling our waste, which we mostly are not. And this one is just bone-chilling. So China has got facial recognition, but not only facial recognition, they've got ethnicity recognition. So you can program a door to flag members of a certain ethnicity, like Uyghurs. So you can be like South Africa. Members of a certain race cannot enter this building. They will be arrested. They will be fingerprinted and all that jazz. And they've been advertising this around the world so you can have racial recognition cameras put up in your country to facilitate separating people by race and ethnic cleansing and things like that. So, and when they was exposed by newspapers, they're like trying to hide it. But that is an option of facial recognition. I think this is one of the many reasons why many large companies like Microsoft have totally moved away from facial recognition. They have realized that this is a really dangerous business. You are going to make a lot of enemies. You're going to sell this stuff, and you're going to be sorry you sold this stuff. Just stay out of this business. Pretty amazing. Optional demographic profiling, facial analysis algorithms, gender, race, and age profiling. Just the kind of stuff that is going to really lead to big scandals and really harm your business to say that you support that stuff. So